In New Orleans, murder make you popular. If you murder a few people, the women are going to love you. That's crazy. It sounds crazy. It is crazy, but that's New Orleans.
After doing research for this video, New Orleans is right up there with Chicago for the craziest city that I've covered. The Metropolitan Crime Commission declared New Orleans the murder capital of the United States, and the subject of today's video might just be the biggest demon from there. The subject of today's video was a hitman for one of the deadliest gangs in the city and allegedly committed up to 19 murders. The subject of today's video confessed to at least 12 of these murders, then told on his whole crew in order to reduce his prison time. Due to his cooperation, the police agreed not to charge him for most of the murders that he committed. The subject of today's video is not other than Gregory Rabbit Stewart, and today we're going to be telling his story. But before we get into the video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Gregory Rabbit Stewart grew up in New Orleans, more specifically an area known as the 9th Ward on Galileo Street, also referred to as the G Strip. He had a very rough upbringing. At just 4 years old, he witnessed a murder for the first time when his mother's boyfriend was killed in front of him. When he was just in the 6th grade, he saw his friend get shot and killed by mistake. According to various psychological studies, children that witness violence are more likely to become violent as they grow older. Greg would drift more and more into the streets as time went on. He started selling weed and crack at just 11 years old. He would go on to earn the nickname Rabbit when he was 15 years old after a friend witnessed him successfully escape a police officer that was trying to arrest him. At age 16, Greg would meet a man named Merle Offray and was recruited to sell heroin and other drugs for him. Greg would become a member of a gang called the 39ers, and they were big-time drug dealers that primarily sold heroin. The 39ers were a mix of members of the 3&G gang from 3rd and Galvez and G-Strip gang from Galileo Street. Greg would eventually turn into a killer after meeting a man named Louis Daniels. Louis Daniels was a prolific killer, and he taught Greg the most effective ways to kill people. He taught Greg that when he went to kill people, he shouldn't aim for the head, but he should aim for the body and shoot until they fall down. Then he should stand over them and shoot them in the head until they're dead. Shortly after meeting Louis, Greg would put the lessons that he was taught to use. He was involved in a murder for the first time at just the age of 16. At 18, Greg would go on a brutal killing spree that lasted 15 months. The first murder that Greg was involved in occurred in 2007, and Greg was just 16 years old at the time. On September 16, 2007, New Orleans police arrived at a house on Urquhart Street to find 3 people suffering from non-fatal gunshot wounds. The officers apparently didn't check the backyard next door. Hours later, officers were called out again and found Calvin's dead body there. Greg would later confess to assisting in the killing of Calvin. As a deal for cooperating, the police agreed not to charge Greg with this murder. Over 2 years after the death of Calvin, Greg's 15-month killing spree would begin. On February 22, 2010, about 15 minutes before midnight, Kendall FAIVBRE was in his car when someone in a sport utility vehicle in the 7200 block of Salem Drive fired several shots at his vehicle. Kendall was shot in the head and arm and was transported to Interim LSU Public Hospital in guarded condition. While at the hospital, he was tragically pronounced dead at just 22 years old. Greg testified that he committed this shooting as retaliation for one of his associates named Percy getting shot and paralyzed by members of a rival crew called Press Park Gang. As a deal for cooperating, the police agreed not to charge Greg with this murder. On Monday, April 12, 2010, at approximately 1:30 p.m., a man named Daryl Franklin, his leader Merle Offray, and another man named Terrence Butler were at Terrence's mom's house near the Wing Shack in the 2500 block of Desire Street, when a man named QUELTON BROUSSARD, a man named ELTON Fields, and another man named Corey Lewis pulled up in a blue Chevrolet Impala. QUELTON and his cohorts began shooting at Greg and his crew. During the shooting, Terrence Butler was shot and killed. QUELTON and his crew then fled the area in their car. Within moments after the attack, Greg and his crew armed themselves with a .223 caliber semi-automatic rifle, a .7.62 caliber semi-automatic rifle, and a .40 caliber handgun. All three men jumped into Merle's red Audi SUV and gave chase. Daryl, Franklin, Greg, and Merle caught up with the blue Chevrolet Impala and saw QUELTON in the driver's seat. Greg and Daryl and Merle, who were each in possession of a firearm, opened fire on QUELTON's vehicle. At least 48 shots were fired into the vehicle. QUELTON sustained multiple gunshot wounds to his chest and head and died later from his wounds. A cooperating eyewitness will testify that they witnessed Greg and his crew jump into the Audi and chase after QUELTON. This witness would also testify that QUELTON and his associates were also street-level drug dealers that had an ongoing turf battle with the 39ers. Greg would ultimately plead guilty to this murder. On May 11, 2010, a member of the 39ers named Pound, real name Ashton Price, assisted Greg in shooting and killing a man named Rayshawn Jones. Rayshawn was an associate of a rival crew beefing with the 39ers called Ride or Die Gang. Just 8 days later, on May 19, 2010, Greg and 4 other members of his crew shot and killed a man named Lester Green and injured another man named Jamal Smith. Lester and Jamal were riding in a gray Acura when gunmen shot up their car with over 26 rounds from an assault rifle. Lester was shot once in the head and was tragically pronounced dead at just 21 years old. Jamal was struck as well but survived his injuries. Jamal Smith was one of the 39ers' biggest targets as he would constantly shoot at them, and he allegedly killed one of their associates named AP. Both Lester and Jamal were associated with the Calliope Housing Project gang that beefed with the 39ers. 8 days after that, on May 27, 2010, a man named Donald Daniels was driving his Nissan Maxima in the Desire neighborhood when he was shot. Donald would tragically be pronounced dead at just 25 years old. According to paperwork, Greg and another member of the 39ers named T-Red, renamed Terrius Oni, killed Donald because he was an associate of the rival Desire Housing Project gang. As a deal for cooperating, the police agreed not to charge Greg with all 3 of these murders. On October 11, 2010, a man named ELTON Fields was driving a silver Infiniti M35 when he was followed. A member of the 39ers named Lee, real name Leroy Price, was driving the stalking vehicle, and Gregory, Stewart, and T-Red were passengers. Once they caught up to the vehicle, both Greg and T-Red shot and killed ELTON. According to paperwork, they killed ELTON because he was an associate of the Desire Housing Project gang, and he was involved in the murder of Terrence Butler. Greg's charges for this murder were dropped due to his cooperation. On December 20th, 2010, at approximately 12:20 p.m., Renetta Lowe, aka Magnolia Shorty, and Jerome Hampton, aka Man Man, were shot multiple times while seated inside a Chevrolet Malibu. Both were pronounced dead at the scene, as each suffered gunshot wounds to the head and upper body. Greg and his associates T-Red, Tyrone Knockham aka T-Bone, McCoy Walker aka Rat, and Rico Jackson aka Freaky were in a white Crown Victoria that was owned by Greg's girlfriend. The car was being driven by T-Bone as the group was looking to locate Jerome Hampton. Once they found him, they pulled up near Jerome's car while it was in a parking lot of an apartment complex. Greg, T-Red, Rat, and Freaky exited their car and opened fire with several semi-automatic weapons, killing Jerome and Magnolia Shorty. While being fired upon, Magnolia Shorty, who was the driver of the Chevrolet Malibu, accelerated the vehicle, which then crashed into a wooden fence. According to the New Orleans Police Department, there were over 50 spent shell casings at the scene of the murder. According to a cooperating witness, Jerome Hampton was a member of a rival drug gang and had a well-earned reputation for being a killer. Jerome had an ongoing feud with members of the 3NG gang, whose members sold drugs and controlled the area around 3rd and Galvez. As I mentioned earlier, 3NG gang is one half of the 39ers alliance. Jerome Hampton made it known that he was looking to kill Merle Ofrey, who was one of the highest ranking members of the 39ers, and he was also looking to kill any member of 3NG. Greg and his associates were ordered to carry out this murder due to Jerome's threats. On February 6, 2011, Greg and a known associate shot and killed Calvin Celestine, aka Plucky, in furtherance of the overall drug conspiracy. Shortly before the shooting, Plucky gave Daryl Franklin approximately $60,000 in advance to purchase a kilogram of heroin. Once Daryl had the money for the heroin, he left New Orleans to travel to Houston to purchase the heroin. Greg was then directed to kill Plucky to avoid having to deliver the heroin when Daryl returned. Greg and his associates looked for and found Plucky while he was sitting in a black Chevrolet Tahoe in the parking lot of his girlfriend's apartment complex. Greg and his associates then shot Plucky several times in the head using a .223 semi-automatic firearm and a .40 caliber Glock Model 27. After the murder, Daryl gave Greg a portion of the heroin he had purchased using Plucky's money and approximately $7,000 as payment for the murder. Furthermore, at least 2 cooperating witnesses have independently stated that Greg confessed to being responsible for this murder. Greg would ultimately plead guilty to this murder. On February 20th, 2011, a man named LITTLEJOHN Haynes was shot to death in the 3200 block of Murray Street at just 21 years old. Greg and his associates Jasmine Perry, aka Rel, Curtis Neville, aka Pooney, Evans Lewis, aka Easy, and Solomon Doyle, aka Black, all shot and killed LITTLEJOHN. 2 handguns and 2 assault rifles were used in this attack. According to paperwork, they killed LITTLEJOHN because he allegedly stole drugs from one of Greg's customers. On April 28, 2011, Greg and his associates Washington McCaskill, aka Big Wash, and Damian Barnes, aka AD, shot and killed Floyd Moore, who is believed to be an associate of the Calliope Housing Project gang. They used a Bushmaster assault rifle and an AK-47 in this attack. As with the other murders, Greg was not charged with these due to his corroboration. On May 24, 2011, Gregory Keys was murdered and Kendrick Smothers was seriously injured in a drug-related shooting. Kendrick would testify that on that day, Greg had still not paid Kendrick the money he owed him for a drug debt. At approximately 8:45 p.m., Greg called Kendrick and asked him if he wanted to come pick up the money. They agreed to meet on Desire Street in the 9th Ward. Kendrick drove to the location with his friend Gregory Keys, who was sitting in the passenger seat. When Kendrick and Keys arrived, Greg was standing with a man named Evans Lewis. As I mentioned earlier, he's also nicknamed Easy, and they were standing outside an M35 Infinity. Easy walked up to the passenger side of the car and started speaking with Keys. Kendrick started to get out of the car and looked across the hood of the car and saw Easy leaning over the hood of the car holding a gun. Easy raised the gun and shot Kendrick in the face. As Kendrick was lying on the ground, he heard gunshots being fired at Keys. The gunshots stopped briefly, and when Kendrick looked up, he saw Easy and Greg standing over him. Greg was holding an AK-47 assault rifle, and Easy had a .40 caliber handgun. Kendrick was shot at close range approximately 7 times. However, more than 30 total shell casings were found on the scene. Immediately after the shooting, Greg and Easy entered the Infinity and fled the scene. Kendrick entered his vehicle with Keys and attempted to drive towards the city on St. Cloud Avenue to a hospital. While doing so, he crashed his vehicle. Police and emergency services arrived at the incident at approximately 10 p.m. Keys was tragically pronounced dead by the medical personnel who arrived on the scene. Later on May 25, 2011, Kendrick was shown photo lineups and identified Greg and Easy as the shooters. During the course of this murder investigation, federal agents were able to obtain cell site information on Greg's cell phone. This information corroborated the information relayed by Kendrick and placed Greg at the scene of the murder at the time of the murder. A corroborating witness would later testify that sometime during the week of May 21, 2011, Greg told him that he was going to kill Kendrick. Greg would later admit to helping plan and set up the murder, but he would claim that Easy and another man named Jasmine Perry were the actual shooters. Greg's murder spree ended with his arrest in June 2011 at a motel south of Atlanta on federal heroin distribution charges. He was 19 at the time. By then, federal agents had been monitoring him and other alleged members of the 39ers for several months in an expanding array of wiretaps. Greg had risen during his teens to upper management. Following his arrest in 2011, a federal grand jury named Greg and several others in an alleged drug conspiracy. He was jailed in St. Charles Parish. While there, he offered to provide details on killings and heroin suppliers. Greg asked for assurances that he wouldn't face more charges for detailing his role in several killings. Greg's testimony was crucial in the takedown of his entire crew. Many of them received life sentences. Greg's final sentence was not announced to the public for its safety. It is unknown whether or not he is currently in prison, as there is no online record of him anywhere. Man, this story was wild. It truly shows you how the streets is pointless. One of the biggest killers and most respected gangsters cooperated with the police and got his whole crew taken down. If this story doesn't keep you out of the streets, then I don't know what will. Let me know what you guys think about this situation in the comment section, and please be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.